Welcome to the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast, where we remember a time when stacks of cards were held together with rubber bands and Mickey mantles were put in bike spokes. We hope you will enjoy and reminisce as you come along with us as we tell stories about the baseball cards from the Golden Age of Baseball. We will examine the state of the vintage baseball card market and talk to some of the greatest collectors in the hobby. You won't be hearing us talk about any chrome or shiny cards here. Now, to take you on this retrospective journey, here's your host, direct from the shallow end of the gene pool, my son, Mike Moynihan.
Yo and hello everybody, Mike here. Welcome to another episode of the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast. We're getting into the dog days of August now. I'm looking forward to a couple things like the next Dallas Card Show, which is in early September. I'm making plans on trying to make trips to the Philly show or out to California to the Burbank show, and just trying to figure out how to incorporate some more baseball trips into my life with my friends and hanging out and all that, because it's just so much fun. And the National was a spark for that for me. It was like, whoa, I want to do this more. And it's funny for me where inspiration comes from for topics to talk about on this podcast, other videos, etc. But today I had an opportunity to go to a new card shop that I'd never been to before. And I'm going to have a video on that. It'll be the same day that this comes out over on Baseball Collector on my channel, where I talk about, a lot of people don't know, I have another channel besides what happens here on Bench Clear Media, Baseball Collector, where I talk about just vintage baseball, my collection, just different things beyond just what we talk about here on Golden Age of Cardboard. But I went to this shop and I was inspired, and I really have two topics that I'm going to discuss today. One of which is this card shop and what I saw there and what it made me think about. The second one, it was a question that I got on Instagram, which, oh, by the way, is at Baseball Collector Mike. So if you have questions for me, ideas for the show, topics you'd like to hear me cover, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. I appreciate all the kind words that I get from people week in, week out, day in, day out, really. So thank you for that. And I thought with these two topics that I'm going to discuss today, wisdom is a key factor in that. And wisdom is, when experience, meets knowledge, and you bring those together and you form wisdom. And wisdom only comes with time. You can't just be born with wisdom. You have to screw up. You have to have successes and failures in life that lead to wisdom. My dad always says, it's never a mistake if you learn from it. And I've always carried that with me as an adult, that great pearl of wisdom that he gave me so long ago, and it's rang true in my life. And in this hobby, there's another guy I want to bring on to talk through these two topics with me today that does have a lot of wisdom, and that's John Mangini. Hey, John.
Hey, Mike.
What are you doing today? Causing trouble?
Not at all. Never.
Not at all. I want to give you some props on a couple of videos that you've done talking about just, I'd call it kind of the state of the hobby and where we're at, and this idea of this bifurcated hobby of either you agree or you're wrong. If you don't agree with me, you're wrong. And I think that's very societal right now. I don't want to get into politics or any of that. In fact, I don't even know if we agree on politically anything, but I think we can agree that our world has become so if you don't agree, I think that's a bad, it's a bad mantra, right?
Yeah. I mean, the hobby has changed just drastically over the last few years.
Yeah.
And not all of us are handling it well,
Right. But what has happened is the great, I think, I'm calling it kind of the vintage rush, like the gold rush of the old days. There's this rush towards vintage, which is good for the hobby, I think. Not necessarily good for you and me. But the reason I wanted to have you on especially to talk about the second topic, is because you have a lot of experience in what we're going to talk about, and that's acquiring vintage cards and where to do that. And so many people ask me all the time, where do you get stuff? And I have some thoughts. Well, I'll share what I think. You share what you think. Probably have some points we agree on, points we have different perspectives on, which is good, which is why you're here. But I want to do this topic because I got a question last month from Lauren Inquist. And sometimes when I get things from people on Instagram, I save them because I'm like, okay, that's a great topic for discussion when I have this. So here's the question from Lauren. He says, I love your podcast. Thank you for all the time you sink into sharing the hobby with all of us. I am returning to the hobby after the typical hiatus. So not an uncommon story, right?
Right.
I hear this all the time. I've noticed for vintage cards that PSA graded cards carry a premium over the other grading services, even BGS. Do you have a sense on what that reason might be? Is there value for us buyers buying a card graded by a reputable grading service versus PSA? Thanks. And I didn't tell John this question / inquiry, I guess, before.
No, you didn't.
I didn't. And because I wanted to get your guttural reaction to it. What are your thoughts when somebody says something like that?
Well, I mean, he's on point, right? That's where the hobby's at. Should it be that way? I don't know. My gut is, you know me, Mike. I collect all different slabs. I collect. I don't want to call it raw. Everybody calls it raw and graded. I'm going to call it a card and a graded card. That's what I'm going to call it from now on. And I've never understood the fascination why a PSA card, sells so much more than another company's card. Like for me personally, like I'm an SGC fan myself. I have lots and lots of PSA cards. I have lots and lots of SGC cards. But it is true, but it's just perception in my opinion. It's perception. And, I've been on Facebook groups where people think that anything other than PSA is junk, right? And, if it's graded a 9 at SGC, then it's going to get a 7 or an 8 at PSA. And, of course, we know that's not always the case. That's not true. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, I agree with everything you've said. I think that there is a gap that's closing. I think SGC is closing the value gap in a lot of areas, especially on the vintage side. I have nothing against SGC as a company. I think they're great. I think they run their business incredibly well. I know Peter. I've talked to him privately numerous times. He's the real deal in terms of leadership and what he's trying to turn SGC into. So nothing but good things to say about them. And yet I'm a slave to the set registry. I've said it multiple times.
Right.
I do like the consistency in my collection. So there is some OCD to that part of it where I want all the slabs to be the same.
Mike, right? I actually get that totally. Like that's one thing I would like more consistency, honestly. It's just I seek out the best card at the best price I could find. And so if it happens to be in a Beckett or a whatever, I'll grab it. I totally get that.
But that's the whole point. We both get I see your point of view completely clearly. And you probably see mine pretty clearly. And it's like, but I'm still going to probably do it my way. You're still going to do it your way.
Right.
And that's okay. Like that's I guess the point. So to answer Lauren's question directly, PSA has a longer track record. I think the gap is closing, and I think you should buy the best card that you want to buy for your collection. Damn the slab, slab be damned. Whatever holder it's in, who cares? I bought a GAI card not long ago, a mini Minoso that I wanted for my collection. I mean, go figure. Yeah, I'm going to get it reholdered, but it was such a good price that I was like, yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, I think the best answer we can give is that it should be whatever you want. Like I buy the best card, but if you want to, if we're talking collecting, then who cares? But if you're talking selling, obviously you want to have it in the slab that's going to get the highest amount of money.
Right. Yeah, I just think, to answer his question directly, people just, I think there's a snobbiness about PSA in the hobby, and that's,
Yep.
I don't know how else.
And
to
you know, going back to how I will buy multiple slabs, different slabs, and you like that consistency. Well, man, there are so many collectors like that. So the difference between me and them is I keep them in these slabs, and
Right.
but there are people that will immediately turn around and submit them. Like they'll buy the card that I bought, you know, in a Beckett or an SGC, but then they turn around and they have to have it at PSA. So they'll immediately send it in for, you know, a new slab to PSA, a reslab.
Yeah, I'm not that guy. If I have it, again, if it's really one of the non-big three, you know, or now you could say four. I don't own any CSG holders. I have a few HGA actually, but they're all modern, super ultra modern stuff. So I don't have any interest in converting those over, because I like them. I like cards being protected in a slab versus the card by itself told me not to, so I'm not going to use raw. But
well, no cards are raw. I mean, unless you actually leave them loose, right? I mean, most people put them in a magnetic holder or a top loader or a semi-rigid. They're not raw. You know, a graded card is just a different type of holder, right?
Different type of protection. I mean, yeah, even if it's in a binder, it's not raw anymore. It's not
exactly
just sitting on your table. Yeah, that's a great.
I never really understood that term.
Yeah, that's a great point. But what I want to spend a bulk of this at, so thank you, Lauren, for the question. Guys, send them to me. I want to incorporate as much of your interaction, because it's hard. Podcasts are different. You know, people may write comments all the time on YouTube, but when you're doing a podcast, the only way people can interact with me is through Instagram. And so I welcome that and appreciate every time somebody sends me a message. Most of them all of them are great. Nobody's ever written me and told me I suck, but I just probably opened myself up to that. Oh, well. So, but the bulk of the discussion I want to have today, where we'll spend the rest of our time, is the question that I've gotten, John, I don't even know how many times, a lot. Hey, where do you get your stuff? Where is the best place for me to go get cards? Where do I find this stuff? And there's so many answers to that question that I think it's important to break down. Maybe I'll give you one place that you can hunt for cards, and you talk maybe, John, about your experiences, pros and cons that you've had dealing in that type of an arena for the buying of cards, acquiring cards for your collection.
Okay.
And then I'll maybe throw in some 2 cents here and there. The biggest one, the biggest marketplace that's out there, and we're going to handle this one first, is eBay, right?
Yep.
Obviously you could probably go search and find darn near anything you want on eBay right now. When you tell people about buying, especially vintage, we're talking about vintage now, buying vintage on eBay, what are your kind of recommendations / pearls of wisdom that you might give to people?
Well, I'll be honest, Mike. I mean, that's where I've acquired most of my cards. When it first came out, I couldn't believe there was a website, an avenue for me to go on and in a minute find all these obscure or rare cards that I never had access to before. And that is actually my number one source.
Yeah, my number one source too, by the way, is eBay.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the place I like to buy cards the most. It's simply where I have the most cards available to me, right?
It's so convenient. You can watch things, you can put them in your cart. You could buy things in a second, right?
Yeah.
It's almost too easy.
And make offers, and you can sometimes negotiate, sometimes kind of go back and forth with the seller.
When you put it on your watch list, sometimes there will be something great on there, but it's under the radar, and it'll be on there for a year or 6 months, a long time. And when you know that, then you can reach out and make an offer or something. I reached out to a guy the other day. I was like, this has been on here for over a year. Do you not want to make me a counter offer?
Right. Yeah. And I think people think, well, if it's on eBay and there's not a best offer, that you can't make an offer. And that's simply not true. You just send message to seller. There's a button you push and you can type in there, hey, I've been watching this card for a while. You've had it at this price. I would love to own it. And I'm always nice about it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. That's okay.
I mean, I think those kinds of things work more often than not, actually. And a lot of times those sellers, they're very honest. They're like, look, I need to get this out of it. If you make this offer, I'll take it.
Right.
Something along those lines.
There's some sellers that I know that I bought from a lot that I know they have auto accept 10% lower than their
right
than their current, their listing price. If it's $40 and you offer 36, it's going to auto accept it, because it's 10% lower. Some are more, some have auto declines, because I lowball everything and I am not ashamed of it. I don't care. Yeah. I want to get the card as cheap as I can. If the guy's willing to sell it to me, it's great. Why should I pay full price ever? I just won't. And again, people think I'm hard-headed or I'm being cheap or whatever. And my only answer to that is, I want to stretch my hobby dollars as much as I can. I want to buy as many things as I can. I think you and I are both a quantity of quality type people. You buy a lot higher graded stuff than I do, but that's okay.
I don't know about that. We're very similar, and I'm identical in that way too. If I can't get it for the right price, then I move on, because there's plenty of other things to go get.
Exactly.
And I've passed up cards that I want just because they're just not priced right for me. And there's so much out there to get. And yes, I'm a quantity guy.
Yeah.
And I don't say quantity over quality, because just because a card is graded maybe a 3 or something doesn't mean it's not quality, especially if it's a rare card. I was showing this Rogers Hornsby, and PSA has graded 6 of them, and the highest graded one is a 1. So is that a low quality card?
Right.
Right.
No, and I didn't mean, if you heard me say quantity over quality, I didn't say that. I meant quantity of quality. I want a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. You know what? It's just that's something I hear a lot, and I've actually said it, and I don't like that term, quantity over quality. But we kind of use it, but it's not really accurate if you think about it.
Yeah, I want a lot of quality. So however you want to say that, I want to buy a lot of good, cool stuff. Yeah. And that doesn't mean highest graded. That doesn't mean most expensive. That just means cool cards that I like, that I want for my collection. And so eBay, certainly the gorilla in the space in terms of where people can buy vintage. And I think when you're buying graded cards on vintage on eBay, it's a lot, I'll use the word safer in terms of whether or not you're going to get an authentic card. Is it going to be in the condition that they say it's in? Buying non-graded cards wise can be a crapshoot. I've had good experiences and I've had bad experiences with that I think I first started my eBay account in 1998. So what's that, 24 years that I've been buying on eBay. And buying non-graded is scary, which is actually why I started getting into grading in the first place. Cause I started buying graded cards, because I started buying cards that I was worried, man, if I buy this and spend all this money and it turns out to be fake, shame on me. Just buy a graded one. At least someone else has provided a professional opinion on their question of the authenticity of the card. So that's what got me really. I thought grading was just buying graded cards was dumb for a long, long time in that world. And about the last 15 years, I've finally said, I'd rather just have them, in a slab, and you know what you're getting right at that point.
Absolutely.
And so just be careful. My cautionary tale to people would be careful when you're buying ungraded cards on eBay. It may not be what you expect, and just kind of caveat emptor there, buyer beware. And, just,
Yeah. I mean,
beware.
I've been doing it so long, and most sellers put good pictures on there. I know so many of the sellers on there. So there are many that I feel so comfortable with. And I know what, I mean, when you're inspecting the card and stuff, and many people may not want to take that much time to look at a listing, but I'm zooming in and I'm checking things and I'm comparing things, and I really do a lot of looking at it. And I've had nothing but good results, really. I mean, I've had more situations where somebody didn't package it well and
Sure.
something might have happened than I did getting fake or altered cards or anything like that. I've gotten some fantastic cards for next to nothing that grade real high.
Yeah. Yeah. Greg Morris cards is one on eBay that if you're buying non-graded, they're a great seller. That's one that if they say it's a excellent to mint card, it's going to be an excellent to mint card.
Dean's is good. We had this discussion the other night. Dean's is good, and everybody, they're a lot of these bigger dealers and the ones we're talking about are a little bit more money. Usually you don't get a ton of phenomenal deals, but you're paying for that peace of mind too. Like Dean's will grade their cards. They give you on the back of the card, they grade it themselves. Mm-hmm. And if you've ever got a card from them and sent it in, I'll bet you got a grade right around there. I'm willing to bet.
Yeah, 707 sports cards is the same.
Another good one.
Super expensive, relatively speaking, but they're going to have stuff that no one else does a lot of times, which is
I got some great stuff from them over the years. He carries some good stuff.
So the next thing, the next place I want to talk about buying where you can acquire vintage and the pros and cons of that is what I did today. And I went to a card shop, right? And I think the experience at a card shop, although it's an in-person experience, is still vastly different than a show. Okay.
Yep.
And I think we need to differentiate the two. We'll talk about shows in a second. What's your thoughts on buying vintage at a card shop?
You know what I love about that? It offers an interesting dynamic that you don't necessarily get at a card show, and you definitely don't get on eBay or any other platform like that. And that is, most of the card shops are owned by a guy, and you get to interact with him when you're in there. And they will share with you like where these cards came from, maybe a little provenance. And if you have a card shop and you trust them, it makes you feel a little more comfortable knowing maybe where they came from and getting a little backstory, where he acquired them, how he acquired them, kind of thing. And I love that interaction with the card shop owner.
Yeah, I think the differentiator from a card shop is the ability to build a relationship. Like you may go to a card shop 5 times before you pull the trigger on a certain vintage card. And by then you can, versus a card show where it's a relatively quick interaction, you might have a conversation with the dealer, but the reality is it's a very temporary relationship. Yeah. Versus a card shop where a relationship can last years and decades, even, where you're going, I bought tons of stuff from my buddy up in Oklahoma, going in there time after time and finding new stuff, or finally pulling the trigger on a, Babe Ruth Sanella, margarine card or whatever.
Yep.
That I had been eyeballing for 6 months. And every time I go in there, I talk about it, or whatever. And you can build that rapport with a dealer where maybe they'll work with you a little bit. Not to be just, you always want to be on the up and up, but it's okay to build a rapport. Why do I need this card? I'm building this set, or I'm a big Ruth guy, or Ernie Banks, name your player, whatever card you're targeting. You can tell your story too. And that can resonate with a hobby shop owner differently than a dealer might be feeling at a table. And usually at a hobby shop, like the one I was in today, first of all, they had no vintage, which was very disappointing. I literally walked out of there buying nothing. But I
always disappointing.
Always disappointing. I tried to do a deal on a modern card, but I wasn't comfortable with what they offer. They offered me under what they had on it. and the dynamics are different too. You know, a card shop owner, which is, I hear this all the time at the card shops I go to from the kind of old curmudgeon owners. Oh, I have to pay rent and salaries, and that's all true, right? I'm not saying that they don't have overhead, but they're still in the business of selling cards. And so I always have a hard time because I'm offering, and a lot of times I get, no, I don't want to do that, or I don't care what eBay comps are. You'll still get that in any in-person interaction that you might have trying to buy cards. But I think that building that rapport, building that relationship is a great place if you can find a shop that actually has any vintage. And that's where I was,
well, that's the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem with card shops. The biggest negative is typically their inventory is relatively scarce, or it's relatively dated. It's been there forever. I go to one of my local card shops, not the one I went to today, but he has the same stuff in the cases. It's all way overpriced, and I have most of them anyway. And it's like, well, you're not showing, there's nothing new here, and it's not doing a whole lot for me. So it can get frustrating when there's not ample turnover of inventory versus eBay, where the stuff's constantly, you can have saved searches and stuff pops up every day for those saved searches, or every week.
And it is hard to find a card shop that has a lot of vintage cards. Nowadays it's about the packs and a lot of the signature cards and those kinds of things, the rookies. And most of the ones that I go into don't have a lot of vintage. I go to one in Myrtle Beach, and he has mostly vintage. And I mean, it's fantastic. You could just walk around there for 2 hours.
Yeah. Those are certainly fun. And how would you describe the difference between that type of interaction to buy vintage versus a show environment?
Well, I'm in the card shop environment is preferable to me. For, like I just said, when you go to a show, those dealers are there and then they're gone. A card shop, they're there, and you can go back at any time should something be wrong, and you have that going for you. And the dealers, oftentimes, they just bought the card 10 minutes earlier. They know nothing about it. They might have got duped. If it's a card, not a graded card. And
right.
But the good thing about the shows is the variety. Like when I go into a show, and you're probably the same way, I'm sure, is you could just spot that vintage table, man. You just see it out of the peripheral vision, and just run over to it. And they kind of stand out these days from all the shine.
Yeah, I turn on my vintage radar, and it is honing in on all the old stuff. It's like, oh, I'm getting a ping over there, and you can walk by in a show, and I can tell immediately this is a table that's not for me because it's got ultra modern basketball or something.
Right,
I'm like,
right.
No, not for me, and that's okay. But what I do love the variety. I think you're 100% on point. The variety you'll find at a show, you won't find everything. Even at the National, you won't. Everybody says, "Oh, if it exists, it's at the National." That's not true. But because what I don't find what I wish was at the National that I don't see is kind of it's all the high end vintage, right? There's tons of that everywhere. If you want to buy a PSA 8 mantle, pick your flavor, and you're going to find tons of them around the National floor, and true of pretty much every major show around the country. I want the PSA 4s and 5s and 6s, and give me that stuff. And people don't bring that table space at a show. It's very limited. They have a hard, hey, look, we got to bring the stuff the higher end stuff, because that's going to make our show for us. We're going to be able to pay for us being here and all. And I get that they have overhead too and all of that stuff. So I'd love to see more mid-grade, vintage kind of stuff at shows. But what I saw at the National, John, this was your first National, wasn't it, this year?
It was my first National, and I was surprised. I was surprised there wasn't more of the more obscure vintage, because I always heard that if it exists, it's going to be at the National. No, it wasn't. I mean, they have lines of 1960 Manals and that kind of stuff lined up, and somewhat 50s. Although I found, man, you and I, we like those lower grade but good looking cards, right? The eye appeal. And I was disappointed in the choices of cards from the 50s. They had the eye appeal of them.
Yeah.
I mean, even if they were graded a 4 or 3, I didn't see like the ones that I have in my collection that are just look beautiful. They were off center. They had flaws. You know what I mean? I didn't see a lot of good looking 50s cards there. And I certainly didn't see a lot of the cards that I shop for, the more obscure stuff. There were several cards on my radar. I didn't even see one. And there was, I was looking for a 1959 Bazooka Hank Aaron. I found one, and the guy wouldn't budge on price. It was overpriced in my opinion. And so I couldn't pull the trigger on that. But there were some things I didn't even find at all.
Yeah. Yeah. But what I'll tell you, my experience from this National 2022 in Atlantic City versus previous ones that I've been to, a lot more ungraded cards. To choose
I
from.
noticed that right away, Mike. It stood out like a sore thumb. How much ungraded cards there were? How many? Yeah.
And I think, is it the chicken and the egg? Are people gravitating towards ungraded because graded stuff is so expensive? Are they gravitating towards ungraded because it's just easier? It's more available? I can't answer that.
I look at it in a little bit of a different way. I took it as they don't want to pay to grade them because it's gotten expensive.
100% agree with you there. But that's why it's all not graded. And you used to ask the question 2 or 3 years ago of if a vintage card isn't graded, what's wrong with it? Because it was so cheap to grade. Why wouldn't you grade it?
Yeah.
And now you can't say that. You can't say, well, why, something's wrong with this card, obviously, or else it looks really good to me, but something must be amiss because it's not graded. You can't say that anymore. And people think, well, it was around 3 years ago. Why didn't they grade it then? I can tell you from experience with chasing cardboard and other things, I'm finding lost vintage collections, and I'm not the only one looking for them. I mean, my point is there's a lot of vintage out there that's in the closets, attics, and basements of people all over this country that is being surfaced and coming onto the market all the time. I talk to other dealers and they're buying collections all the time of ungraded, untapped vintage. And because of the cost of grading, like you said, John, those are staying in raw form, in ungraded form, and they're getting out to the market, and they're getting out there. It's a great time if you're a raw guy.
There's no doubt. I say that all the time. There's a lot more raw out there than you think. And that's exactly why. I mean, your average Joe's not going to spend $10,000 to have their uncle's or their father's cards graded. They're just not going to do that. And I mean, when it comes time to sell, and maybe they go to an auction house or a dealer, somebody like that, and maybe at that particular time they might suck it up once they have that assessed. But you're right; these things are sitting in their closets, and believe me, there's a lot more than people think out there. I mean, if I wasn't on YouTube, you wouldn't know the amount of raw cards I have sitting in here. Yeah. And I mean, the price to grade, if you're not going to make a $500 margin or something, it's just not worth it. And so you see the big cards graded, and the other thing is people aren't going to pay a lot of money for those big cards if they're not graded because you're worried about it. But I say this, I think you've heard me say this. It would cost me like $1 million to grade all my raw cards, Mike. Am I going to do that? I mean, even to grade a large portion of them, me, I'd rather go buy new cards.
That's right.
Than spend all my money to PSA. But that's just me.
I'll show a couple cards here to you. Great examples of exactly what you're talking about. Here's a beautiful 58 Topps Gil Hodges.
Oh yeah,
new Hall of Famer, greatly centered. It's sitting in my to send to PSA someday. A 61 Gil Hodges that I have raw, a 63 Jim Cott. These are kind of newer guys that I picked up some raw cards of theirs. Minnie Minoso, another 67 Jim Cott that are just waiting.
I have every one of those raw.
Right. I do. Yeah.
Well, you just bought some rock cards off of an old collector, right? And you had them graded.
I
And
did.
they graded right around what you thought, right?
Yeah.
And they were higher end.
They were. And that's where grading for multiple reasons made sense. Even though I paid $200 a card at the National, I took the money I had spent for them to buy the cards, the money plus the grading, and I added significant value by grading them.
Yeah, now that's one of those scenarios where I'm saying, like, you trust the provenance of those cards, right?
100%. But I still wanted them to be authentic. I still wanted another opinion. I thought they were real based on everything.
Yeah. But what I mean is, you felt more comfortable buying them because of who you were buying them from.
100%. 100%.
And that's kind of how I feel. Back to the discussion of the card shop, when you go there all the time and you can interact, and maybe they'll tell you about the provenance a little bit, the background story, where these cards came from and so forth. I had, I picked up some cards from, my dad had a friend, and he wanted to raise money for his grandchild to go to college, and he gave me all his old cards. I mean, they're still in binders. They're from when he was a kid. I have no doubt these are all legitimate cards and unaltered. Aside from they weren't the ones that weren't in the best condition, altered from being in somebody's pocket or something like that. But you know what I mean,
right? That's not altered. That's played with. That's
right. But the provenance of cards coming from a priest from when he was a kid, I feel a lot of confidence in those cards.
Yeah, for sure. Another place now, in our world today, a lot of card deals are happening on Instagram, Facebook. I know you're a big Facebook guy. I belong to a few groups, but nothing where I'm buying cards on those platforms. Has your experience been a positive one on those types of platforms?
It's been positive and negative. I don't feel like I've ever gotten scammed on eBay, but I had a few bad experiences early on Facebook when I was just getting back into the hobby, feeling my way, wasn't really familiar with the brand new cards that were out there. And over, in the upper 2000s, I was relearning the modern cards. And there were people on there, they would, I don't know, like ask you for a check, and then it turns out they're total scammers. I ordered these two tall boys cards, and one came, and when I looked at it, when I got it, it had a pen mark under his eye. And I reached out to the seller, and I was like, there's a pen mark under his eye. And he's, telling me basically I put the pen mark there. I'm like, why the hell would I put the pen mark on a card I want? Like, what sense does that even make?
Right.
It's just stuff like that. So it's hit or miss, but then there are fantastic sellers on there too. So I think you have to, and it depends on the group. Some of those groups are policed very well, and the admins keep a close eye on all that. But Facebook, you can just get an account, scam somebody, they shut you down. You get a new account with a totally different name. Nobody knows you're the same person. So it's much more risky. It's much more risky than eBay. And there's nobody to go to if you do get scammed. Where are you going to go?
Right. Versus
eBay, if you pay PayPal, you could make a claim with them. But it's a lot of nonsense for nothing. It's a waste of time.
Yeah, I don't want anybody to hear what John's saying and say, don't do that. That's not his point.
No, and that's not what I'm saying. I've gotten some fantastic cards on there for good prices. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's riskier.
Just be careful. Yeah, like anything, right? I mean, I have a laundry list of times I've been duped on different things, mainly autographs that I've bought that I should have known better. And I still bought it anyway. But sometimes that's worked, so.
Yeah, I mean, no venture in your life, no hobby, nothing at work is ever going to be perfect. You're going to encounter stuff. It's just never going to be perfect. I don't care if you have somebody coming over doing some construction at your house. Whatever you engage in life is never going to be perfect all the time, right?
Right. Totally.
And certainly nothing worthwhile.
Right. Amen to that. There's some new places. I bought cards on things like My Slabs. I think it's a great alternative to eBay. The variety is significantly less. But you can find some stuff on places and platforms like that. They're usually policed really well. The last one I want to go into is auction houses. And I get this question a lot, like, who are some reputable auction houses? Well, it's a long list of reputable auction houses. There's actually quite a few. And I know you and I have both bought a lot more in the past than I have recently because people have caught on to this. I used to get amazing deals years ago on auction house items because it was a relatively untapped marketplace. People weren't, engaging in that, or they thought you had to be some super rich guy to be on an auction house. And that's not true. That's a complete misstatement of the truth. You can be any dude. You can buy a $10 card or a $10,000 card. There's a lot of high end stuff on there, no doubt, but there's regular stuff. I'll call it regular stuff too, for us regular Joes like you and me. But I used to do that a lot more. And a great resource, I don't know if it's still around. I better not give it because I don't know. There used to be this cool resource where you could, let me just look it up. You talk about auction houses while I'm looking this up. What's your experience been?
So I've only ever bought from an auction house twice, and one was this Sunday on REA.
I missed out on everything I bid on REA. I got blown away.
Yeah, I heard that from everybody. I mean, everybody I know got like one or two things and got blown out on everything else. I got blown out on everything, but I won my backup, Mike. I had a backup plan because I found just a fantastic complete set in two uncut sheets of 1941 play ball, but the paper version, which are way more scarce than the regular ones. And so I was talking with Rick, and he's like, well, I would like to have one of those. So, we'll halvesies it or whatever. And I wanted the top one because most of the ones on the bottom sheet, I already have the paper versions in singles. So I wanted the top one, and it had, Hank Greenberg and Ted Williams. And so I bid on that, and I was afraid I would get outbid on it. So as I was just scrolling through, and I didn't really look through the auction much, I found a second bottom sheet, which some good players, including some of my Pittsburgh Pirates on there. So I'm like, I'm going to bid on this. And just in case I get outbid on that other one. So like 5 minutes before the auction closed, I got outbid on the other one. And I won the bottom one, the secondary bottom one. So at least I got one. And I can frame it, and it's going to look fantastic.
Yeah, I've bought dozens, if not hundreds, of items on auction houses over probably the last 10 to 15 years. And it's actually probably longer than that. And I've had nothing but great experiences. You got to be careful in terms of remembering that you're paying a premium on top of your hammer price. So if it ends at $100, you're really paying 120-ish plus shipping and insurance, and you can get nickeled and dimed a little bit. So just know that don't bid more than you're willing to pay, factoring those things in and making sure that you realize that. I found the resource, John. I want to share it. You probably know about this, but if you don't, I'm excited that you might learn something new here.
I'd be excited too.
I'd be surprised if you don't know about this, but here's a website, and I'm showing it on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're on podcast, oldcardboard.com, which is like, hey, it says your information resource for vintage cards. Like it's a great place. Have you seen this before?
I used to subscribe to the magazine, and it's the most, it's the best magazine for the really old stuff you could ever imagine. And I never threw a single one away because every one was just jam-packed with useful information. That's where I learned about all the old strip cards from the 1800s, a lot of the e-cards. That was a fabulous, fabulous magazine.
Well, one of the things they have right here on their homepage is the auction/show calendar. And if you click on that, it'll give you all the major auction houses. If they're having, they've got auctions that are in August and September and October and kind of all these different things. And they're constantly updating it. So you'd want to check. It's not like something you fire and forget. And what's great on the website, this calendar, is they have a link directly there. If you want to go to Love of the Game auctions, for example, that's ending on August 20th, you can click on the link and go right to the website and check
They
out
have
what
some
they
fabulous stuff on there too, because I know some guys looking at. They're
Yeah,
sending
they
me pictures of what they want to bid on. I mean, you can't get much safer than an auction house, right?
So yeah, so great resource if you're curious about auction houses, you want to look into it. You know, I welcome the competition. I've long since given up that I'm going to keep anybody from finding anything. I'd rather share the knowledge and expand the hobby and help people find cool stuff for their collection than try to act like I have some information that's not readily available. So I'd rather share it.
Hey, I want to tell you about my first auction experience, and it was the first one until Sunday.
Okay.
And it was back in like around 2003 or 4, right before I quit, basically, because I started traveling around for work. And so anyway, they had a live auction, and man, was that fun. And I found this card I wanted, and it wasn't, it was a low starting bid and everything. So I made myself a pot of coffee. I went and got on my computer, and I sat there, watching the auction, and it was live. So you could put your bids in and everything. And it was really fun. And I won it was a 1915 Cracker Jack Eddie Siccotti in a 5, that's high grade for those cards. And so I ended up winning it. And I ended up selling it too, because it's just not a card that's like aesthetically pleasing to me, of all the Eddie Siccotti cards and other vintage cards. And so I got it undervalued, and I could sell it for a profit. And I finally sold that, went out and bought other vintage with the money.
There you go.
But I kind of regret it, only because, and I rarely say this, Mike, because I'm not a grading junkie, but it was a nice 5, and it's just not easy to find those Cracker Jacks in 5s too often. That card's probably worth $7,000 now.
Right. We could all tell. We could spend the next hour talking about our regrets in the hobby of things we got rid of.
We could spend the next month talking about that.
Right. Well, John, thanks so much for being on the show tonight. Thank you for your time, bringing your level of experience and expertise and just wisdom to this discussion. Guys, when you're out there looking for vintage, just be careful. You're going to look, like John said, you're not going to do it perfect. You're going to make mistakes, and just learn from them. Just take that as a, part of your course for learning about vintage. People, how do I not make mistakes? You're not going to not make mistakes. Like, that's just, good luck with that. Good luck at having that happen. Any final thoughts, John, before we close up here today?
I mean, that's great advice, because, that's how I've learned. You make a mistake, man, you don't do that a second time.
Right.
Right. So it could save you from making a big mistake later. Yeah, for sure. But you got to get out there. You got to experience these cards. You got to know what they look like, feel like, smell like, compare them, because really it's just experience. The more experience you have with these cards, I can spot fakes, I swear. They just don't look right to me. I can't even explain why they don't, but you just get this sixth sense, really. They just don't look right. You just stay away from them.
Yeah, there is no substitute for experience. And unfortunately, that doesn't come overnight. It takes time.
Yep.
And so be patient. Most of the vintage stuff is not rare. It is, you can buy a mantles whenever you want. Don't feel like, oh, I've got to get this right now. Be patient, learn about it, make sure you're getting the best bang for your buck, so to speak, and rely on other people. Ask other people, get people's opinions. There's lots of people that are willing to share and help, and they get excited. I remember at the show, getting excited for your friends as they would buy cards that you love too, and you get, man, let me help you buy that. Let me help just be another non-emotional voice in your head helping you, because we get emotional about our own card purchases. Believe me, like, I really want this. But tell me I'm crazy. Andrew Nusshead Cards, my cardboard whisperer, who's talked me out of some bad deals and talked me into some really good deals that I don't regret. And, you know, having resources like that is important too. So,
yeah, I think one thing we should hit on before we wrap this up is, you know, if you're getting new into vintage, you don't necessarily know what to pay. And you know, when I want to buy, I only know card prices at 2 times. When I want to buy one, or if I happen to be selling one, right? And if you go onto eBay and just take a look at other cards, that particular card selling in a similar condition, it'll give you a good idea of what people are asking. And so you have some idea what you need to pay for that card. And that way you don't, you know, you're not overpaying for everything. And you're not just paying what people are asking.
It is the question I get asked the most is somebody will send me a card on Instagram that they're thinking about buying. What should I pay for this?
Right.
And like you just said, dude, if I already own it, I don't know. I don't track the prices really. And I'm not going, and it might be a different grade than I have, or what, you know, I don't.
People think we're walking Beckett price guides, you know.
Right.
It's like I get that all the time. I'm like, I have no idea, especially now, because it could be different next week. And but if I haven't looked at the price, if I haven't shopped for it, how would I have any idea what it was going for? You know, I might have a ballpark, but I wouldn't know for sure.
Yeah. So my answer to that typically is, hey, go look at it, which is, it sounds like I'm being snarky.
Yeah, I know, right?
Look, you can look on eBay. You can look on eBay just as easy as I can. I mean, if you want me to do the work for you, fine. But you need to learn how to do this. I'm going to teach you how to fish, not just give you a fish. So you can not ask me every time. And so do your homework. You know, we say that all the time, but it's true. And tonight, John, thank you for being a part of it. And
hey, thanks for having me.
Hope you guys learned something. Hope you got some nugget out of this, and that you can add to making your PC awesome and something that you love and cherish. So that's it for tonight, guys. We'll tune in next week. We'll have another episode, not probably with John Mangini, but John, thanks for being here. Appreciate you, man.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. See you guys later. Keep collecting.